Hi, I'm Scott Postma for Kepler Education, and in this two-part video series, I'm explaining why I believe that the path to a free and happy life begins with a liberal arts education. This is the second video in a series, so if you haven't watched the first video, I recommend you go back and watch that video first. In the first video, I made a thorough treatment of the meaning of a classical liberal arts education and showed its importance and benefits throughout history, namely that it has historically cultivated a wise and virtuous people whose resultant happiness produces free and flourishing societies. In this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to get a liberal arts education by explaining how it works and what we need to be in order to be educated. I'd like to say that last statement again. I'm going to explain how a liberal arts education works and what we need to be in order to be educated. Since the liberal arts reached their zenith in the Middle Ages, it'll be insightful to turn to one of the most influential educators of that period, John of Salisbury, to get our answers. John was the secretary and counselor to Thomas Becket, the renowned Archbishop of Canterbury, who was murdered by the instigation of Henry II. John published an influential treatise on education called Metallogicon, meaning literally about logic. Drawing heavily from the works of classical antiquity, along with patristic and medieval Christian writers, Metallogicon is said to be the cardinal treatise of medieval pedagogy, a classic in the history of educational theory and a landmark in several fields of learning, including philosophy, theology, psychology, and education. In the first place, John explains that the one true God, the creative Trinity, has so arranged the parts of the universe that each part requires the help of all the others. That is, all things being members one of another, and they mutually compensate for their respective deficiencies. Building on this idea of a harmonized cosmos, John taught that the proper education reflected this universe that God created, one that has various working parts, each with its own purpose and function, and so arranged as to be mutually dependent on the help of the other parts where it is deficient, while also offering its strengths in the areas where it's more competent in its function. This understanding echoes that of the ancient Platonic understanding of the human soul, that it is most virtuous when the noetic, thumotic, and epithumotic natures of the soul are all working together in harmony according to their respective strengths. Let me unpack this just a little bit. In the first place, the noetic nature is where reason and wisdom resides, but cerebral logic is often weak at the task of accomplishing what it ought to accomplish. Consider how many New Year's resolutions you've made and then quit, maybe even before February rolled around. In the second place, the epithumotic or appetitive nature, the passions, is where we feel and where we desire. And usually this is described in antiquity as the bed and the table. The appetitive or epithumotic nature is much stronger than the noetic nature and tends to overpower reason. Think about how hard it is sometimes to resist that extra dessert, or how many times we tend to hit the snooze button just one more time. It's often the case in human nature that our passions overpower our reason. Finally, the thumotic or spirited nature, where discipline and courage resides, is strongest of all, and it's that part of the soul that must be employed to keep the passions in check with wisdom. Or to put it in C.S. Lewis's words, the head rules the belly through the chest. To summarize this first point, a liberal arts education is a harmonized education, an education that cultivates the soul according to its natural order, where the proclivities of its various natures reflect the created order, and that each of the parts are members one of another, functioning in a complementary role. Said another way, the kind of education that cultivates this sort of harmony in the soul is a liberal arts education. Next, John makes the observation that the liberal arts are specific to philosophers, and he draws a line between arts associated with craft and trade and arts that are for making people free. He says that while there are many sorts of arts, the first to proffer their services to the natural abilities of those who philosophize are the liberal arts. In the medieval period, and even today, we distinguish between the three basic kinds of arts. There are the servile arts, or sometimes called the trades, things like carpentry, masonry, and even medicine. There are the fine arts, like painting, music, sculpting. And then there are the liberal arts that deal with wisdom, virtue, and human achievement. To be clear then, the liberal arts are to be distinguished from the other arts as the arts by which we philosophize. And by philosophize, John means those who love and therefore love to pursue wisdom. See, the word philosophy is a compound word made up of philo, meaning love, and sophia, meaning wisdom. And it literally means the love of wisdom, the pursuit of knowledge that makes one wise. So the liberal arts are designated by two Latin names, trivium and quadrivium. The word trivium means three paths or three roads, and quadrivium means four paths or four roads. And together the liberal arts, properly speaking, are 7 arts bifurcated into 2 branches. And John asserts that the system of the trivium, the first branch, treats the significance of all words, and that the rules of the quadrivium, the second branch, treats the secrets of all nature. He echoes Hugh of St. Victor here and concludes that by asserting that those who master these arts are no longer in need of a teacher, they are capable of teaching themselves from books and from reason. The body of knowledge is known as the great books, and the exercise and ordering of the mind via that body of knowledge is called the life of the mind. And so there's a sense in which we are to say that a liberal arts education is both a body of works and a way of life. This fits exactly with the definition of a liberal arts education that we previously established: the pursuit and acquisition of that knowledge which is pleasurable for its own sake and which frees the mind and prepares the soul to be wise and virtuous. The question now is, how does this happen? That is, how does one exercise his mind on this knowledge that is pleasurable for its own sake, this knowledge that cultivates harmony in the soul, in order to free the mind and prepare the soul to be wise and virtuous? Well, first, in the words of the late John Shaw, it requires one to be eminently teachable. That is, an eager but humble learner. It means one has a desire to know, a desire that extends beyond mere curiosity, although it has to be at least that. A person who is eminently teachable recognizes that there's a vast body of knowledge that has existed outside his being and before he ever was. A body of knowledge he knows will teach him things about himself that he did not even know that he did not know. In the second place, we have to grasp John's treatment of the liberal arts not only as a body of knowledge on which to exercise the mind, but also as a skill set of the mind. In this way, John distinguishes the liberal arts from the other arts previously mentioned in a very specific way. John explains that a liberal arts are not only knowledge that liberates in the sense that they're a body of literature discussing the nature of the cosmos and all that is in it, but they are also a system that reason has devised in order to expedite by its own shortcut our ability to do things within our natural capacities. John suggests that all people have been endowed with natural abilities, and that through study, the diligent and vigorous application of one's mind to the determined accomplishment of something, and that assiduous practice of those natural abilities, one can make progress toward the mastery of that ability to the degree that the ability itself becomes a skill set of the mind. In John's word, an art is a faculty of accomplishing what is difficult, an efficient plan which avoids nature's wastefulness and straightens out her circuitous wanderings so that we more correctly and more easily accomplish what we are to do. To use a modern illustration, let's think about driving as an art. In the beginning, a driver's clumsy, trying to get the hang of checking mirrors and watching for pedestrians and trying to keep the vehicle between the lines, all while remembering to use a blinker and follow traffic signs. Initially, it's overwhelming, but with practice, it becomes easier until one day, someone who's practiced driving properly uses their blinker, changes lanes, and follows the traffic signs seamlessly, and often even unaware of their habits. And this is also the difference between a new and skilled carpenter or a new and skilled surgeon. Perhaps at this point, we introduce a good neologistic expression to explain what we're talking about. For the sake of this lesson, let's refer to this concept as an artificial faculty. In this sense, the liberal arts are not only a field of knowledge per se, but they also become a skill set, an artificial faculty of the mind in the same way that surgeons, carpenters, and drivers become skilled at their trades, masters of their craft, if you will. The idea of liberal arts in this sense is remarkable because they're more than just a field of study and they're more than a craft or trade exercised for the benefit of others. In this sense, they create a set of tools in the mind that are exercised toward wisdom and exercised toward the benefit of acquiring that knowledge that makes people free to create meaningful and purposeful lives. The servile and the fine artist produce for the good of others. Whether a carpenter, a cook, or a smith, The skill and craftsmanship the servile artist attains by study and practice directly benefits others. The servile artist's work transmits from his own head and hands to other people or to material objects. He planes a board, cooks a meal, or crafts a horseshoe. And similarly, the fine artist creates a song or crafts a poem or paints a picture for others to enjoy. The imagination of the fine artist is transmitted through his hands, his pen, or his instrument out into the world as a thing of beauty and a joy forever, to quote Keats. The liberal artist, on the other hand, also develops his skill and craftsmanship by study and practice. But what he produces returns upon himself, at least initially. Unlike the fine or servile artist, the liberal artist's activity is intransitive, and its benefit is intrinsic. Like a rose, the liberal artist blooms. Like a rose that absorbs the nutrients, the water, and the light and grows thereby, and is ultimately perfected by blooming, it's also perfected by the enlargement and blossoming of his soul and imagination via the assimilation and cultivation of wisdom and virtue. Additionally, we can recognize that the primary benefit of the art of the servile or fine artist is produced for others, but we must also recognize that there is secondarily some intrinsic benefit to their work as well. There's typically some great personal joy and satisfaction in the completion of one's work. And inversely, while the primary benefit of the liberal arts is intrinsic, there is a secondary benefit in that the pleasure and wisdom gained from one's study and practice generally has a positive effect on others in contact with the liberal artist. Said another way, if oneself is blooming with the wisdom of the ages, the opulent fragrance of truth and wisdom will be readily enjoyed by all who stop to smell the roses. Given what's been established thus far, it doesn't seem unrealistic then to refine our definition of a liberal arts education just a little bit, to say it is a body of knowledge and the proper exercise and ordering of the mind via that knowledge to be free enough to know the truth of things. This refined definition not only clarifies what it is, but also implies how it's to be obtained. Said another way, a liberal arts education is to be obtained through a body of knowledge by exercise and ordering of the mind in that body of knowledge to the end that one might know the truth of things, so he or she can be virtuous by thinking, speaking, and acting wisely.